Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 28th of October. I'm Stephen Carroll in London. Coming up today, HSBC's CEO says his overhaul of the bank is working as Europe's largest lender upgrades its profitability outlook. France targets billions of euros in extra tax from the country's biggest companies. Plus, shining a light on Europe's shaky energy grid, why a solar power boom risks triggering blackouts. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. HSBC has raised its profitability outlook for the year despite a decline in earnings after taking a $1.1 billion hit over Bernard Madoff's fraud case more than a decade ago. Revenue at the lender beat estimates in the third quarter as rising income from its key wealth management business was offset by litigation expenses that dragged third quarter pre-tax profit down 14% to $7.3 billion. HSBC says it now expects to deliver a mid-teens or better return on tangible equity for the year, as well as higher than previously expected net interest income. The CEO, Jean-Laurent, told investors he believes the bank is becoming a simpler, more agile and more focused institution. Well, turning to some breaking earnings news now. BNP Paribas has slightly missed expectations in its third quarter results. Third quarter net income coming in at €3.04 billion. The estimate had been for €3.07 billion as well. Its return on equity for 2026, 12%. The full year for this year, 11.5% as well. It's also set aside a little bit more than expected for loan loss provisions, €905 million. Analysts had been expecting just under €880 million. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon says he believes the US economy is in quite good shape, though he cautioned that there remains a lot of uncertainty. His comments come as the Federal Reserve is expected to deliver its second straight rate cut tomorrow to support a wobbly jobs market, even as inflation remains well above target. Speaking exclusively to Bloomberg, Solomon said inflation continues to pose a significant headwind for many US consumers.
Businesses that are particularly sensitive to lower income or paycheck to paycheck consumers have been a little softer. And I would say, consumers that are paycheck to paycheck feel more pressure in an environment with 3% inflation. And so there's no question inflation is very, very difficult for people who live paycheck to paycheck. And so it's something I think we have to watch very carefully.
David Solomon was speaking at the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, where he also told Bloomberg that the Wall Street lender plans to triple its headcount in Saudi Arabia. The boss of one of Wall Street's biggest banks added that he sees artificial intelligence as an exciting driver of global growth in the coming years, predicting significant productivity gains over the next 36 months. Amazon is planning to cut thousands of jobs across core departments, including logistics, payments, video games and its cloud computing division. Reuters is reporting that as many as 30,000 roles could be affected, with terminations to be announced as soon as today. Sarah Fryer leads Bloomberg's team covering big tech. She says a number of firms in the sector are in the same position.
This is something that the companies all across the board have been doing since the pandemic era, what they call overhiring. A lot of these companies saw the growth in how people were relying on tech during the pandemic, and the company hired to accommodate that, and now they don't need as many people.
Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer speaking there. The planned cuts would be the largest since rolling reductions in late 2022 and early 2023, which affected more than 27,000 corporate employees. An Amazon spokesperson declined to comment. The former star trader at the heart of the 2012 Libor scandal is suing UBS for $400 million. Tom Hayes' conviction was overturned by the UK Supreme Court in July, and he now wants his former employer to pay damages. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has more.
Tom Hayes' case was the most high-profile financial crime prosecution of the past decade. That is, until July, when the Supreme Court overturned that conviction in the UK. He told Bloomberg at the time he had been blamed for the entire banking sector's wrongs.
We were scapegoated. We were accused of causing the global financial crisis, which had nothing to do with how, Japanese yen Libor moving around by 1/1000th of a percentage point had anything to do with the global financial crisis is completely beyond me.
Now, his lawyers are arguing his former employer, UBS, ruined his life to escape more severe penalties for the Libor scandal. A spokesperson for UBS declined to comment. The case is filed in the US state of Connecticut's court. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
US President Donald Trump has praised his country's close ties with Japan during his meeting with new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in Tokyo. Trump commended her plans to boost defence spending and expressed optimism that the two countries had overcome their trade disputes.
On behalf of our country, I want to just let you know, anytime you have any question, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan, we will be there. We are an ally at the strongest level.
Donald Trump speaking there as the leaders signed documents on trade and critical minerals, expanding on a deal negotiated under Takaichi's predecessor. Documents from the White House suggested that the agreements remained ill-defined, reaffirming ongoing cooperation. The meeting was a high-stakes test for Sanae Takaichi, who was elected Japan's first female prime minister earlier this month. And in France, the National Assembly has voted to increase taxes on the country's largest companies next year. The Finance Ministry had originally aimed to raise €4 billion in extra revenue in 2026 by keeping part of a temporary corporate tax hike. Yet after lawmakers rejected other measures, including a planned freeze in income tax brackets, the ministry increased its target to €6 billion. Finance Minister Roland Lescure spoke at the National Assembly.
Bon, d'abord sur la méthode.
The government has committed to listening to the debates that will take place within the National Assembly, and I believe that by introducing this amendment, that is exactly what it is doing.
French Finance Minister Roland Lescure there speaking via translator. The amendment means that the corporate tax rate would fall less than initially planned next year. It's part of the government's efforts to rein in the deficit and find compromises to avoid no-confidence motions that could topple Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. And those are your top stories. On the markets, the MSCI Asia Pacific Index 0.4% lower. The MSCI China Index is down by 1%. Eurostoxx 50 futures 0.2% weaker this morning. Gold prices sliding again today, down 0.6% at $3,958 a troy ounce. So below the 4,000 mark as well. Looking at the 10-year Treasury yield, holding steady at 3.98% this morning. In a moment, we'll bring you more on HSBC's results, plus why a surge in solar power is stressing out electricity grids across Europe. But I just wanted to mention another story that I've been reading this morning. Perhaps another nail in the coffin of London's black cabs. Our opinion columnist Parmi Olsen has been writing about how after private hire cars, airport express trains and Uber, cabs are now facing a new threat from Waymo's driverless cars. The company is seeking a licence to test their cars on London streets from next year. Now, Waymo claims that its cars are in fewer collisions than those driven by humans and that many passengers actually prefer the silence of not having a driver. But Parmi writes about the potential cultural loss, although she does say a Waymo executive told her that nobody says I miss the conversations with drivers. Black cab numbers are already dropping in London. Just 104 new drivers were given licences last year. That number was closer to 1,000 less than a decade ago. And a 2025 study by Transport for London warned that black cabs could be wiped out entirely by 2045. For Parmi, she says this could be worse than the loss of London's phone boxes, and it spells out our preference for algorithmic convenience over human connection and skill. It's a great piece. I recommend it. Bloomberg.com/opinion, and we'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes. Well, let's dig into the earnings from HSBC now. Revenues of the bank came in higher than expected in the third quarter, even as it took a $1.1 billion hit tied to fraud cases linked to Bernard Madoff. Our Asia Finance reporter Ambreen Chowdhury joins me now for more. Ambreen, this is a strong set of earnings aside from that legal provision. What drove the strength?
Stripping out the Madoff litigation charges, if you look at everything else, basically its key driver was the Hong Kong business, and that drew profits before tax. It basically jumped 11% to about $2.5 billion in the quarter, and that ultimately is being driven by the higher client activity across its wealth management business, which has been a key focus for the bank over the past few years. In short, since becoming CEO about a year ago, their newish CEO Georges Elhedry has struck a noticeably bullish tone in Hong Kong as a financial centre. He's predicting expected that the city will surpass Switzerland by the end of the decade to become the world's largest cross-border wealth hub. And, to a certain extent, we're already seeing that is true because they are making so much money from Hong Kong. And over the past few years, the wealth business has been a huge earner for them, despite all the other legal issues elsewhere.
Well, interesting with that bullish sentiment, Hong Kong, that actually one of the wrinkles in HSBC's earnings report was the bank's exposure to the Hong Kong property market.
Yes, exactly. That has been a bit of a wrinkle for them. So they are quite grim. It makes for quite grim reading. They basically are warning that market conditions remain tough in the near term as a result of weak leasing conditions. And it's said that the commercial property sector continues to face downward pressure with both rental and capital values impacted by oversupply, particularly in the office market in Hong Kong. And their current exposure in this quarter stands at around $200 million, which isn't too bad, but still an ongoing issue for them.
So what does this update tell us then about how Georges Elhedry's strategy in leading HSBC is going? I suppose the outlook as well looking pretty positive for the bank for now.
That's right. They've raised their profitability outlook for the year for 2025, even as earnings fell because of the provision tied to the Madoff fraud case. They've basically said that they expect to deliver a mid-teens or better return on tangible equity for the year, as well as higher than previously expected net interest income because all their businesses are doing quite well, despite all these legal issues that have come to front over the past day or so. And also, we have to keep in mind that the bank's been undergoing a broad revamp of its businesses since Elhedry took over last year. So he has undertaken quite a radical review and also a bunch of asset sales throughout the world.
Okay, Ambreen, thanks so much for joining us with the latest on those numbers out of HSBC. Ambreen Chowdhury, our Asia finance reporter, with the latest. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, solar power's rapid growth across Europe has countries racing to revamp their electricity grids to prevent a dramatic blackout. The situation is getting more difficult to manage, and operators say they lack the tools they need to balance out the effects of solar power. Our energy reporter Will Mathis joins us now for more. Will, good morning. How big, first of all, a part does solar power play in Europe's power mix, and how fast has that grown?
Well, it's grown incredibly fast. Just in the past 5 years, in some places, it's gone from single digits, like in Spain, to more than 20% of annual electricity, and it's just growing more everywhere. Even places that traditionally haven't used solar power at all, like Poland, that's relied a lot on coal, they're ramping up solar incredibly fast, partially because it's gotten much cheaper, and also to get rid of those imported natural gas that became so expensive and controversial in recent years because so much of it was coming from Russia. And it's just really gone much faster than anyone would have predicted even 5 years ago. Even the strongest solar power proponents in 2020 would be surprised to see today how much has actually been built.
So what issues then is that creating for electricity grids?
It's really just an incredibly different system. The way the power moves in the system, instead of going from like a few large power stations and a few points on the grid to many, you could have just a system on my house, on your house, on every house on the street. And that just creates an incredibly different dynamic to manage. And what I talk to a lot of the grid operators who are the people who are, every day, every second of every day, keeping the lights on, managing the balance between supply and demand. They said, if you have one house on a street put on solar panels, that's really no big deal. It doesn't really matter what they're doing. But if you have every house on the street have solar panels and something goes wrong, then it could cause a big problem.
So what's being done about it?
So what's being done is different things. I mean, one, we did see earlier this year what happens when not enough is being done, and in some places not enough is being done, like in Spain, where they had this incredible blackout where they didn't really have any new backup on the system, and that led to this cascade, which European investigators have described as an unprecedented event, an unprecedented kind of blackout, but is a sort of totemic worst case scenario of what could happen to other places. And what you can do, you can get different equipment that sort of simulates what fossil fuel or like nuclear plants do to stabilize the grid. Or you can also change some of the software settings in solar plants so that they don't cause problems, that they can actually help manage stability instead of worsening it. But these things need new regulation. They take time, and we'll have to see how the regulators who are used to working on like quite slow timescales for power grids, if they can adapt to the speed that this transition is actually taking place at.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.